The Xeer Somali, or Somali traditional customary law, is one of the most fascinating and sophisticated systems of governance in the world. It is today still partially practiced in several countries of the Horn of Africa, like Somalia, Djibouti, and Ethiopia. UNESCO recently added the heer, the customary law of the Somali Isa clan, to the list of humanity's intangible cultural heritage. The Xeer Somali has continuously fascinated many lawyers and researchers, with some qualifying it as one of the very few examples of a successful anarcho-capitalist society with a decentralized system of governance based on the voluntary agreements between its members. The heer, or customary law, dates back to the 16th century. It is believed to have emerged as a way to govern and regulate society after the collapse of the prosperous Islamic city-states of the Red Sea, such as Harar, Zayla, Berbera, and Tajura. After many centuries of prosperity predicated on the trade along the maritime route of the Silk Road, many of these once prosperous cities began a long-lasting process of decline under the pressure of competing regional powers, which started important movements of migration outside the walled cities. Some historians have qualified the second half of the 16th century as the Middle Ages of the Horn of Africa, with natural disasters, wars, mass movements of population, and societal upheaval, which profoundly transformed Somali society. And it is in that time of uncertainty that heer emerged as a way to govern society, with strong principles of adherence to the rule of law and equality amongst all members of society. When we think of Somalis, particularly in the northern part of the Horn, we often think of a society that was always nomadic and pastoral. But in fact, many Somalis, as far as the 11th century, lived in cities alongside the Red Sea coast, where they developed a unique identity and citizenship tied to their city-state. And when those cities lost their capacity to defend themselves against external threats, many citizens abandoned the unsafe cities in search of security and solidarity within their clan or tribe of origin, which generated a unique phenomenon of re-nomadization and re-tribalization. The heer is a result of this unique period, and it came as a response to generalized disorder, and it was designed to build a new society based on the rule of law. It is in fact the embodiment of the ingenuity, practicality, and rational-mindedness of Somali society. So what is heer, or the customary law of the Somalis? Heer can be used as a verb, describing the action of building a safe shelter to protect oneself against external danger, such as floods. By extension, the word hero means the livestock pen, the enclosure where animals are kept to protect them from wild beasts. Heer is also used as a noun and means the rope which is used to put together the two central arches that support the Somali circular house. Therefore, the concept of heer implies the idea of protection, security, and togetherness. In fact, the term heer is frequently used in Somali language to designate social facts and behaviors related to legality, smartness, uprightness, and equity. And despite the primal importance of kinship in Somali society, heer gives primacy to legality and respect for the law over the dictate of kinship and blood relations. It is illustrated by this heer precept, "Walalka markhatiga kufr, magtana labihi," which means, give testimony against your brother if he is wrong, and then help him pay the fine. Heer recognizes the universality and inalienability of human rights for all people, as illustrated by this other precept, which says, "Gal kadil karti sanasi," which means fight the foreigner but recognize his rights. In fact, some analysts consider Somali heer as an early model of the Geneva Convention. Like the Geneva Convention, it contains specific rules identifying certain categories of the population as categories that ought to be protected in case of war. These categories, called birmegedo, those who do not deserve the sword, include women, children, elders, people of knowledge and religion, guests, and all those who are not parties to the conflict. The dignity and rights of the wounded and prisoners of war are also guaranteed by the rules of heer. One of the core principles of heer is restorative justice. Heer prioritizes reconciliation and restoration over punitive measures. When conflict arises, the focus is on restoring relationships and compensating the aggrieved party rather than simply punishing the offender. Blood money, known as diya, is paid in cases of injury or death. The amount is determined based on the severity of the harm. The heer contains extremely detailed tables to fix compensation levels. For instance, harm to each part of the human body carries a fine in accordance with how indispensable it is to normal life. Each teeth is worth 5 camels. A finger or a toe is worth 10 camels, while each joint of a finger or toe must be reimbursed by 3 1/3 camel. This solidifies the sacredness of one's personal and physical integrity, which is correlated with the highest signifier of wealth in human society, the camel. Therefore, any harm calls for adequate compensation, reparation, and restoration. But what distinguishes Somali heer is that the reparation and compensation is not just the responsibility of the perpetrator alone, but it is in fact the responsibility of his whole family and clan. The reality is that in most cases, perpetrators do not have the ability to pay for the compensation on their own, since fines are often exorbitant to prevent and deter violations. The blood compensation for murder, for example, is 100 camels if the victim was a man, and 50 camels if the victim was a woman. If one looks at this fact without having a profound understanding of the nature of Somali heer, one could think that it means that the value of a man is double the value of a woman. But in fact, the goal of heer is to drive compensation and reparation for the material harm caused, not only to the victim's family, but to his whole clan. And in that regard, losing a man of the clan means losing a seat at the tribal assembly, as traditional Somali society is based on a one-man, one-vote system. Therefore, the loss of one man is a loss of power that impacts the whole clan, and it commands a higher material compensation. The function of heer is to drive as adequate a compensation as possible to prevent conflict and more violations, which is why the emphasis is on reparation rather than punishment. In fact, today, many studies have proven that restorative justice significantly reduces reoffending rates, particularly in cases involving violent and property crimes. Offenders who participate in restorative justice are less likely to commit further crimes compared to those who go through conventional justice systems. In restorative justice, the evidence by Sherman and Strang, victims who participate in restorative justice also report a 40% reduction in post-traumatic stress disorder compared to those who go through traditional court systems. Another interesting fact about Somali heer is that it is not enforced by a permanent justice system, a prison system, or by police. The judges who decide on the sentence are part of an assembly of the wise, where each tribe is represented equally, including the tribe of the offender and that of the victim. The procedure is very ceremonial and usually takes place under a tree. It is often open to the public. And in more urban communities, it happens in the house of one of the clan members. The parties must share the burden of proof, and therefore each party has to defend its case, or, if need be, they can appoint one or several lawyers. Since all of the parties' argumentation must be stated orally without deposition of written documents, rhetoric plays an important role in Somali judiciary. Disputed facts can only be considered valuable evidence if there are 3 witnesses that have officially stated its reliability. A guiding principle of Somali customary law is that the verdict must be ruled by means of unanimity. This implies that the 2 judges of the respective families must come to a consensus when rendering a verdict. If one of the parties does not agree with the judge's ruling, they have the right to appeal, and a new court with different judges has to be built, under the condition both parties agree. The heer offers the legal possibility to pass through 12 courts or trees in order to maximize the chances for consensus. But as soon as a decision is taken, the application engages the honor and the credibility of those who took it. While being a judge is an honorable function, the Somali heer judges do not have more power than other clansmen, since there is no monopoly on the judiciary. On the contrary, when a judge violates the law, he will be punished harder or pay higher fines than other men because of his exemplary function. The judges are not allowed to make their judgments on the basis of new rules, but they have to apply the local customary law that the community has generally pre-approved. The court's jurisprudence is not a source of law, according to the Somalis, since all law must be found in the community's customs. Somali judges are not trained or educated to be judges, but they are generally the chosen head of their extended family because of their wisdom and comprehensive knowledge of law. The Ode also knows each clan member personally, and therefore will anticipate any escalating conflicts by mediation and counseling, in order to prevent any further crimes. If the judge has a close personal relationship or a personal grievance for any reason against one of the parties, he's excluded from that position for that particular case. So how are these verdicts enforced? In general, verdicts are voluntarily abided by, given the responsibility of the convict's family in the ruling's enforcement. Still, if the perpetrator's party does not pay the compensation required in the court's verdict, the victim's family may either enforce the adjudication themselves on the court, or they can request the composition of a police force put together out of able-bodied villagers. These law enforcers must comply to the court's requests, as they otherwise risk to be considered cooperating with the perpetrator's family, and they can be sentenced to help pay for the decided upon compensation. In the same way there are no heer permanent courts, there is also no permanent police force, and thus no monopoly of the police. Somali heer was crafted with keen attention to prevent risks of corruption, partiality, and inequities, which could favor the largest and most powerful clans to the detriment of minority clans or victims of crimes. Another important aspect of Somali heer is that it instituted rules for environmental stewardship and collective responsibility towards nature. Therefore, heer rules ensure the protection of grazing lands and water resources, vital for the survival of pastoralist communities, which rely on equitable access to water and grazing lands. The goal is to reduce the risk of overexploitation and conflict by involving all community stakeholders in the sustainable use of natural resources. There are other traditional customary law systems that can be compared to Somali heer in that respect. For example, Maori law, known as tikanga, governs social behavior, resource use, and conflict resolution in Maori communities. It emphasizes principles of mana, honor, wakapa, ancestor relationships, and utu, reciprocal justice. And like Somali heer, it has rules that are unwritten and grounded in oral tradition, and it is based on the collective responsibility of the community to restore balance and justice. In the northern part of the world, the Althing, the parliament of medieval Iceland, presents similarities to Somali heer, as it is also based on a decentralized legal system where disputes are resolved through assemblies of free individuals and clan leaders. And like heer, the Icelandic system relies on mediation, arbitration, and compensation rather than state-enforced punishment. It is striking that these systems of governance, which emerge spontaneously in very different parts of the world, seem to be so similar in nature. For some observers, this illustrates the primacy of what is called natural law. Natural law refers to a philosophical framework, asserting that certain rights and moral principles are inherent in human nature and discoverable through reason. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle explored the idea of an objective moral order. Aristotle, for example, argued that natural law is based on human nature and the pursuit of a good life, or eudaimonia. Natural law was seen as a bridge between divine law, revealed through scripture, and human law, created by societies, which is illustrated in this Somali saying, "Ibahay xogun bu iga abore, abahayna heer bu idige." God created me from semen, but my ancestors designed the heer for me. Somali heer is a compelling illustration of Somali people's ingenuity and rationality, and as such, it is not set in stone. It is meant to evolve with societal changes and the needs of the time. Waxaan la arkin, waxaan la maqlin baa lagu magacaa. An unseen case requires an unheard judgment. This illustrates that heer is open to change and evolution, and as such, it calls on every new generation to add its contribution to our collective wisdom.